This is one of my favorite stories by far. And of course, it's who on earth was Jan Grootboom? Baden-Powell wrote an interesting little piece about it. He had the guts of the best of men. Though I knew Zululand, I was new to Rhodesia and its people, and I needed a reliable guide and scouting comrade. One night we'd crept down to near the enemy stronghold and were waiting there to see his morning fires so as to ascertain his position. Presently, the first fire was lit, and then another, and yet another. Jan suddenly growled, "The brutes are laying a trap for us." He slipped off all his clothing and left it lying in a heap and stole off into the darkness, practically naked. The worst of spying is that it makes you suspicious, even of your best friends. So as soon as Jan was gone, I crept away, taking the horses with me, and got among some rocks where I would have some chance if he had any intention of betraying me. I lay there while the sun rose until at last I saw Jan crawling back through the grass, alone. Ashamed of my doubts, I crept to him and found him grinning all over with satisfaction while he was putting his clothes on again. He said he had found, as he expected, an ambush laid for us. The thing that had made him suspicious was that the fires, instead of flaring up at different points on the hillside simultaneously, had been lighted in steady succession, one after the other, apparently by one man going round to light them. He had pressed in towards them by a route from which he was able to perceive a party of them lying out in the grass close to the track, which we should probably have used had we gone on. And that's the sort of thing that you pick up all over the show. Little heroic incidents from one man, always coming back to this one man. At the end of last week's episode, we talked about how Temba's great-grandfather, Mochori, had another name. Well, partly true, partly not. Throughout my research, as I say, this name just kept coming up. I had to try and make his story better known. In the character establishment of Temba, I also had to find a reason why he took such a completely opposite standpoint in life compared to his friend Jabu. Jan Grootboom provided exactly what historical fiction allowed me to do. Tell the facts, wrapped up in a bit of fiction. This next bit was part of a group discussion when the four friends got together with Carol's father. It all started when Mzilikatsi and one of his regiments lived in the Bakwena village for about 8 months. During that time, Mochodi learned to speak Sindebele like one of them. When they suddenly turned and killed everyone in his village, Temba said, Mochodi's anger was terrible against the Matabele. When he was a 14-year-old boy, he wanted to be like them, so he wore an Indaba style of mbechu, made of skins and tails, and cut his hair the same way. He learned to make shields of cowhide using the right colors, and he made the short, stabbing Ikla spear. He learnt about the ornaments too, the beads and the ostrich feathers, and what they all meant. The young Matabele were good to him, so he decided to become the best Amandebele warrior there could be. He learnt about the hissing before battle, the shi, and all about the horns in their battle formations. But when they turned and killed everyone in the village, Mochodi's anger was terrible against the Matabele. He hid those 17 children in the Liebenberg. Then, after 3 years, he decided he had to take them to Kuruman to talk to the missionary, Robert Moffat. What Mochodi didn't know was that Moffat had seen what had happened to the Bakwena village, and he simply couldn't believe anyone had escaped. Mochodi became a Christian and learnt about forgiveness and love for other people. But although he tried very hard, he could not forgive or love the Matabele. In fact, He hated them with a burning anger. All he could think about was getting revenge on them for what they had done. But he didn't tell Moshete. King Kama also had that Mochodi could dress like a Mashoja and bring back information about what they were planning. So he asked Mochodi to come work with him. And the revenge against the Matabele began. Mochodi found it easy to learn languages. He spoke Bakwena, Xhosa, Zulu, Tswana, and now he was going to learn to speak Afrikaans. One of the Dutch beggars, Andries Henry Potgieter, was a leader of the Voortrekkers, wanting to start a new place for themselves, free from the British in the Cape. He saw some good country north of the Vaal River, almost empty of people because of the Mfekani. We've just been talking about that, Prune chipped in proudly. Jemba smiled and went on. Potgieter had many battles with the Matabele and lost members of his family, many of his trek oxen. He came to see Robert Moffat, too, to ask if he knew of a good Sindebele interpreter. Moffat, who was called Moshete, said, of course he did. So Mochodi worked for the Voortrekkers. Potgieter asked him what else he could do to help. Moshete said he would mix with the warriors in the regiment, find out what they were saying and what they were planning, and bring that information back. But in return, he told Potgieter he needed a Dutch name so that nobody could know who he really was. And that is how my great-grandfather Mochodi became Jan Grootboom. Well, there's a bit of fact in there, a lot of fact in there, and a bit of fiction in there too. But those stories of Jan Grootboom are all fact, picked up from certain points on the scale. He told Potgieter to advance towards the land where he wanted to settle, and that he mustn't do so under any circumstances or cross the Vaal River until he got back. When he did get back, he told Potgieter he now needed to get permission from the local chief, and that had been arranged the next day. Once that permission was given, he'd be able to cross the Vaal. There were many families in this trek, and one of them thought it was all taking too long, and they knew better. So they refused to wait. And one night they took their own small trek to the edge of the Vaal. Their name was Liebenberg. Potgieter was furious, and he sent Jan Grootboom to talk some sense into them. But they were stiff-necked, and they would not listen. Mochodi looked across the river and saw the Matabele were very angry. They were dressed for battle and parading up and down the river, shouting, fist-pumping, and dancing. Jemba takes it up again. Then he saw some children, and the memories flooded back. He moved closer. The two young girls and their brother were kind to Jan, and they brought him cake that their mother had made. He told them if they were attacked, they must hide under the wheels of their food wagon. The Liebenberg family inspired their oxen at 2 a.m. and crossed the Vaal. But before they even formed a laager or even let their oxen loose, the Matabele attacked. They were very vulnerable. Mochodi crossed the river, way out of sight, and watched as the killing and the burning started. He moved quickly, knowing that the food wagon would be the last one to be attacked because there were no people in, and it was full of things that could be taken. The children were there, huddled, terrified. Mochodi encouraged them and said he would find a way to save them. Mochodi got them out of their hiding place, pretending he had captured them by holding their arms behind their backs. He took them to the chief Induna, and he said the Sangoma had told him they were to be given as a present to King Zilikas. the Matabele would always respect what the Sangoma told them. So they took the children and they didn't kill them. And the fact is that the eldest child, Sarah, was given as a slave to Mzilikasi's latest wife, who had a very sickly baby. In that time, that little sickly baby became King Liebenberg. And it is thought that one of the king's best friends, Induna Sam, might have been Sarah's brother. There are many truths there. Sarah was the young Jandu's nurse. Jandu, in turn, as said, became King Liebenberg. The stories of the children and Jan working for the Potkita trek are also correct. But was Jan the instigator of both of those? Could have been. Certainly could have been, with all his experience. Many years later, someone else who asked King Khama for help was the administrator of the British South Africa Company, or BSAC, and that was Dr. Leander Starr Jameson. He was negotiating with King Liebenberg for a road up to Mashonaland, one that would not go through Matabele. King Khama at that time had sent several hundred Tswana soldiers and Bechuanaland police to work with the BSAC during this time in the planning of that same route to be taken by the pioneer column. He asked Jan Grootboom to be with his men, look after them, and help with the interpretation. So once again, King Khama put forward Jan Grootboom's name. Now he was going to work for the British South Africa Company. The truth of the matter was that still nobody knew who Jan Grootboom was. Xhosa, Fingo, Tswana, he spoke all those languages. The first records show he acted as a driver to the missionary Charles Helm on the 3-month journey from the mission at Bakelsdorp in the Eastern Cape. They carved one of the first routes through the Utinikwa Mountains. Carved through those mountains. Unbelievable when you see them in real life. And how he got up, heaven knows. Helm had been appointed to Matabeleland by the London Missionary Society, and Grootboom taught him to speak fluent Indaba by the time they arrived. Again, his name pops up 3 years later, when, with Bulawayo burning, King Liebenberg moved north. Jameson asked Jan to watch, and after the killing of the Alan Wilson patrol, to try and find the king and bring him back to talk to him. Temba picks up the story again. But the big story is of Jan Grootboom and the great Indaba in 1896. Politics aside, of which there was a great deal between the British wanting to gain ownership and defeat the Matabele and the BSAC wanting the same, Cecil Rhodes knew the only alternative was to talk to the chiefs. But he had to get permission from Lord Carrington, and it took months of prevarication. Eventually, he got the okay. But how would they arrange it? None of the Matabele people working with the whites already would go near the chiefs or the impi. They were scared stiff. They told Rhodes any white man approaching him would be shot. Then a much-loved native commissioner, Mr. Richardson, named Amehlu Kwazulu, Eyes of the People, by the Matabele, said he knew someone as brave as a lion. You've guessed it, Jan Grootboom again. My great-grandfather was angry with Rhodes for being away so long because the Amandebele people regarded him as their chief. They did not know who else to trust. There were so many people changing in Bulawayo. He asked him straight out, and Rhodes admired it was stupid of him because he hadn't thought about the people. He was impressed that Jan Grootboom had challenged him. I will reward you, Grootboom, and the men you take with you, if you can sort out this problem to meet the chiefs. But in case you don't come back, you must tell me where your people live, so I can reward them instead. Jan didn't want a reward. He just asked for a pair of field glasses. It took a week to bring back information. First, The Matabele were beginning to distrust Mlemo, who said the white man's bullets would be turned to water, and this did not happen. The second was that Jan and his helpers heard two old women talking as they went to the river to fetch water. And they were wailing. They were all starving, and there had been no rain. Jan spoke to them, and he shared his food. They were very hungry. The very, very oldest woman was Nyamabezana, one of King Zilikatsi's wives. She had been a mighty warrior for the Rhodesian people in her time, and Jan knew of her and respected her and knew the chiefs would listen to everything she said. There was one problem. Jan said she was cheeky, hysteric, shouting and swearing at him when he told her what he wanted. But while he talked, he sent one of his helpers, John Makunga, to run and fetch something. John came back with 2 pieces of cloth, one red, one white. Jan tore a piece of white cloth and a piece of red cloth and gave them to her. He asked her to talk to the chiefs, and in no more than 4 days, she must put the cloth on a stick and hold it up in the air so he could see it. The red cloth to say, war, the white cloth to say, we will talk. Jan and John waited for 4 days, were almost giving up. When there it was, the white cloth, stuck on a long pole and waving. Jan shouted loudly from the hill, saying he wanted to come and talk to the chiefs. After a long time, a voice shouted back to say the chiefs were happy to talk. Jan climbed halfway down, shouted again. Again, he got the same reply. He moved closer and shouted again, then closer and shouted again. Each time, the reply was the same. Woza, sikulume, come and talk. So the Indaba was arranged, but Grootboom was a stickler, insisting that only 4 white men must attend, and refusing to cooperate in any way if this was not the case, and there were people lining up to go to that Indaba. After it was all over, Rhodes stayed in the Matopus so that whoever wanted to come and talk to him could do so, no doubt taking a great deal of advice from an ever-present Jan Grootboom. He promised him a piece of land, cattle, and gold. Grootboom's answer, I don't want it. I go now to live with the missionaries. Even on his deathbed, Rhodes ordered, don't forget Grootboom. He did a fine piece of work for me. See, he gets his reward. C. J. Rhodes. There's no record to say Jan Grootboom ever came back or ever claimed his farm. But again, let's let timber have the last word. I do wonder if the administrators of Rhodes' estate could tell me if I was entitled to his legacy as his great-grandson. But then, how would we prove he was my great-grandfather? How indeed. What a story. What a guy. He must have had the most incredible brain and leadership. Oh, I love it. I think it's wonderful. And yet he's sort of slipped into the also paragraphs of history. And that's just really sad. Now, next week, we have something completely different. Prune and his sister Mora are going to arrange a 70th birthday party for their most beloved sister, Lalan. See you tomorrow.